Welcome to Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. And we start today with the opening song from the Quentin Dentin show.
Something in the air is calling my name. Tells me to prepare a market campaign. My job, I know. Perform the show. But I am just so joyful for my birth. It's such a lovely marble, planet Earth. I look around and marvel, and I know it's worth your pain. 'Cause they want me in the Quentin Dentin show. He's a shining dynamo. He rights your wrongs with helpful songs and a wholesome golden glow. The Quentin Dentin show. They made me alive, they made me a deal. I want to survive, I want to be real. So tell them all to watch this, here I come. I'm gonna be the big guy, number one. I'm waving at the big sky, and they smile and make it so. Singing welcome to the Quentin Dentin show. He's a shining dynamo. Big boots to fill, triumph of the will. It's a pill for your life, quid pro quo. The Quentin Dentin show. I've been practicing. Hello, here we go. The radio will sow. The Quentin Dentin show.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits.
We're gonna have so much fun.
Indeed. And just to make something later in the programme make a bit more sense, I'd like you to imagine that I'm wearing underwear with buckles on it. And that little strangeness, I think, probably sets the tone for today's episode, because we're revisiting the wonderful Edinburgh cult show, The Quentin Dentin Show, by Henry Carpenter. It was a 4-star show when it was in Edinburgh, and I loved it. It was quirky, it was unusual, but it had a deeply satirical heart. It looked at the modern world we live in, and finding something it wanted to expose, did so in the funniest way possible, but also with that dark undertow. It's a beautiful concoction of a show, and I'm so delighted to say that it's now coming to London. It's going to be at the Arts Theatre, more specifically in its studio space known as Above the Arts, and it's going to be here for 2 weeks in May. More details later in the programme. Now, I've spoken about the Quentin Dentin show several times on Musical Talk, and I've had the privilege of talking to Henry Carpenter and presenting one or two of the songs from the show in its Edinburgh incarnation. But Henry has taken all the lessons that he's learnt about musical theatre and the show itself, and he's reforged it into a brand new, reworked version of it, which we might call Quentin Dentin Redux. And its central conceit as a show is that a perfectly typical, slightly unhappy, non-dynamic couple find themselves in the middle of a televised world led by Quentin Dentin, who tells them he can make them happy. And of course, making someone happy has two meanings. It could just be that he has the ability to make someone happy. But what if that making you happy was a compulsion? Well, that's the Quentin Dentin show in a nutshell, or perhaps a nutcase, because it's all very strange. But the most important thing to remember about the Quentin Dentin show is that it's a funny, comic musical with beautiful songs and a tremendously funny tone. And so in today's programme, we're going to be looking at this new production. You'll hear a new interview with Henry Carpenter discussing how he took that show from last year and has changed it, and the reasons he's changed it, to make the West End version, which is coming in May of this year. And then we'll hear from the producer, Hannah Elsey. Now, she was both producer and director of the show in Edinburgh, and we'll talk a little about the strains that can put on an individual. But here in London, she is the producer, and you can hear in her voice and in her conversation what a passion she has for that role. And she talks about the unexpected, perhaps, creative side that role has in the collaborative process that we call theatre. It's not just a nuts and bolts post. And in a few weeks' time, we'll hear interviews and discussions with several of the new cast members for the West End production of The Quentin Dentin Show. But today it's about the creation and the production of this new version. And so first we'll be talking to Henry Carpenter. Henry's somebody I love talking to. He's so honest about himself and his craft, and he is actually one of the funniest writers at the moment. There are so many splendid throwaway funny lines in the Quentin Dentin Show that I can't list them all. But just to give you a couple of ideas, there's one song alone called Numbers, which is absolutely chock-a-block with strange, funny and odd things. There's a lyric in it which is, "What's your favourite number? Is it 5? And whilst that's not a joke, there is something hilarious about the presumption of anyone that they can guess what your number is. Or perhaps, by sheer force of personality, try and make you have the favourite number that they have assigned you. I've overanalysed that, but it's a funny line and it always makes me chuckle. And, harking back to something we said slightly earlier in the programme, here's another quotation from Henry, which has made me laugh like a drain since I heard it this last week. Is it time for something?
Come on, everybody, and buckle your pants. Time to do the number dance.
Indeed. So let's get going with this programme in earnest. In a minute we'll hear that conversation with Henry, after that a song from the score, and then the conversation with Hannah Elsie about being a producer. But to take us into all of that, let's hear the short theme music of the internal Quentin Dentin Show within the Quentin Dentin Show. It's not as confusing as it seems. Musical talk. Henry.
Fuzz.
This is a hat-trick, I think. This is our third chat on the record. Not, I hope, however, our last. But the most exciting news, and you alluded to this when we spoke earlier in the year, was that Quentin Dentin has, well, hit the big time. He's coming to London. To London again, I should say, because he did start here.
Yes.
So you, as always, are involved in it, but in a slightly different way. So just fill us in for our listeners. They know Quentin Dentin. They know that it's this fantastic, unique show from Edinburgh last year. And there was a marvellous review I found online that said it danced to its own music, which I thought summed it up awfully well. So what can we expect? What is different? What's the same? Tell me. Sell Quentin.
Well, hello, listeners. It's wonderful to be back here again on Musical Talk UK. And I'm here to talk about the Quentin Dentin Show, my show, which I wrote. And Quentin Dentin, as you say, Thoz, is coming to London, and Quentin has been reborn. He has been reborn with extra appendages, a new suit, shinier stuff. This is, to my mind, Quentin 1.0. If you were to sort of think about it in terms of like software development, every other performance of the show so far has been like an alpha or a beta. This is the big one. This is the one we finally got. Well, it finally works as a musical. That's a big deal. Like, if it's got a proper musical structure. It's got a big beginning, a big ending, totally new ending.
Ooh, right.
Totally new beginning. New actor playing Quentin Dentin. That's another big thing.
That's a big thing for you, isn't it?
Big thing for me. I've stepped down from playing Quentin Dentin, and we've got a professional actor, the wonderful Luke Lane. New cast, new director, the wonderful Caldy Walton, who acted in it last time and is also the choreographer and makes sort of the incredible dance in the show. We've got new lighting design, and we've got about 4 new songs and a heavily rewritten script. Overall, the show now is punchier, it's meaner, it's funnier, it's more musical, it's more everything. It's dancing harder and wilder to a louder tune than ever before.
It's writ large.
It's writ large across above the arts.
Nicely put. You have to be careful how you say that.
Yes.
Now, this is fantastic. But I, as someone who loved the Edinburgh show, will I still love the London show? I know the answer, by the way, but I want to hear it from you.
I think you'll like the London show a lot more. There's a lot of different material over the body of the show. Like I say, a lot of rewritten scenes, a lot of new songs. I think, though, the biggest changes for someone who was a fan of the show before are the new Quentin Dentin, the new beginning, and the new ending. Now, I don't want to give anything away,
no.
But the show now has a twist ending that you're not going to see coming, and it is, in my unbiased opinion, one of the best twist endings in science fiction musical history.
You mean until The Crying Game, the musical, turns up?
Oh, of course, yeah, until that one, it's true. It's got a new opening which sheds some amazing light on Quentin and where he comes from and who he is, really. And, of course, it's got a new Quentin Dentin, and Quentin Dentin is the charismatic host of the Quentin Dentin Show, and he is more charismatic now and more handsome and more everything than ever before. It's going to be one hell of a step up from any previous iteration of the show, and I think you'll love it.
Well, I'm almost entirely certain I will, but there's a couple of things that immediately jump out from the page there. And everything must develop, so I'm not in any way saying, leave anything in aspect. Yes, nothing was made worse by being made better, so I'm looking forward to it a great deal. But one of the lovely things about the Edinburgh version, I think, was the fact it was a sort of play which suddenly had a musical thrust upon it when Quentin turns up, and there is that sense of a hijack almost in the lives of the characters. Some of these elements are still retained.
That's a key element of the show, and that is very much not going away. But just to shed some light on this, the Quentin show is, as you say, Thos, it's a show about two ordinary people who possibly exist in some sort of rip-off David Hare play or something. They're not in a musical. And then Quentin Dentin, as you say, basically hijacks their squalid little play, and Quentin Dentin he's David Bowie off Serious Moonlight. He's completely the opposite, kind of huge theatrics and singing whenever possible to kind of get his way or advance his point. Keith and Nat still do not naturally sing, but now Quentin has the golden microphone. The golden microphone is a magical microphone that he can give to people to force them to sing against their will. So Keith and Nat find themselves from time to time singing without quite knowing how or why, almost as if he's putting the words into their mouth by the way of this spectacular new theatrical device that we have invented, the golden microphone.
So the songs are actually diegetic then?
Oh yes.
The characters know the songs
have always been diegetic.
The
Keith and Nat are like, where's this music coming from? Again, we're expanding on that idea, and we're expanding on the idea of the audience also being diegetic.
Go on.
Well, that was actually an element in the version of the show you saw. It's just that it wasn't really an element that I explored enough to make it clear. But the intention was, I don't know if you remember, halfway through the show, Quentin starts the show. The show's halfway through when he says, "Good morning and welcome to the Quentin Dentin Show."
It becomes a bit Jeremy Kyle.
That's right, yes. And at that point, Keith and Nat are suddenly aware that they're being watched by an audience. And it never really, it was a kind of unexplored idea previously, but now that's a big new thing. So yes, everything is diegetic in the Quentin show.
And it's referenced in the lyrics then, isn't it, as well, which is in Everything is Fine. You have to, the sacrifices you have to make to have this speech-marked happier life is all about, turning on the cameras and feeding the databases.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been listening very carefully, with
I'm
great pleasure.
I'm afraid that's the cut song, though.
No!
I'm sorry.
Sorry, can I throw myself in front of a bullet in slow motion?
Oh.
However, it lives on in my memory.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, that's fine. But that's a great song in its own right, so that's forgive me, that song will live on regardless. I've got to ask you then, as the architect of the world of Quentin Dentin, and I use that word advisedly, how easy is it for you to revisit something that worked splendidly last year, to revamp it? Is there ever a fear that, whilst the ambition is to make it better, that it might not become so? Or did you go in with new ambitions for the show on the strength of your experiences performing it last year?
I'll tell you what, Thos, doing a show 3 weeks running every night, not only seeing a show that you wrote performed, but also having to perform it and having to be the guy on the line who is not getting the laughs, makes you really consider which bits work and which bits don't. And I came away from Edinburgh with pretty much a rock solid idea of how I needed to fix the show, and I came back, and I think within September, the month back, I'd rewritten the beginning and the ending, which are the big sort of story changes to the show. No, it was over the course of Edinburgh I realised with certainty how to sort of put the finishing touches on it.
Which, funny enough, because there's been so much about the layering of Quentin Dentin. In an earlier conversation we were talking about how Quentin Dentin came to be created. Some of the dynamic of that situation was then replicated in the script itself.
Yes.
And here we have a situation, you're talking about the audience being part of the action, diegetic, and here we are, the audience in Edinburgh have actually fed into your understanding of it as well. So
yeah.
It is layer upon layer, some of it fairly
physical. Absolutely. I mean, art imitates life, and indeed a big part of the show's redevelopment as well is that Quentin is no longer quite as sort of infallible and totally in control as he would like people to think he is. So it's only fitting that I should no longer be playing him, because obviously I am infallible and in control. That's not true.
Oh, you're infallible-ish, which is a brand new concept I've invented.
Yes.
But so therefore you went in with this solid idea.
Yeah.
So you say, good. I mean, I'm very pleased that it wasn't just, because some people sometimes tinker.
Oh God, yeah, no, that's the worst thing to do.
And it is. I knew a man, I won't name his name, but he'd written a show at university, and then he spent the next 4, 5, 6 years rewriting bits, and it was
Really?
never going to be produced again. He didn't go on to his difficult second album and write his next show. He just carried on with that one, and now that's dead and buried, and
Yeah.
he's lost his dynamic and he's lost his impetus. So I'm really pleased to hear that you've actually said, no, this can be made better, and here's how it can be made better. But you've got to stay true to the kernel of the original ideas, haven't you, as well? So you've got to carry with you who Quentin Dentin was and what the show was. Do you find revisiting a mind space easy?
Yes, I do. I think like the way that I'm working at the moment is ever since Edinburgh, I've been working on about 3 shows in tandem, or 4 sometimes. So
some in space.
So one in space, one in Buckingham Palace, one in one in MI6. I'm not allowed to talk about several of these. So you're talking about the kind of kernel of the idea of Quentin. I mean, the kernel of the idea of Quentin is it's a seminar with Quentin Dentin. Quentin Dentin is this character. He's this sort of deterministic robot who has come here to sort of infiltrate and get a tan, in the words of Sparks. And he is telling Keith and Nat, and by extension the audience, his philosophy. And as such, his philosophy can sort of almost be expanded upon and elaborated forever. But
particularly, as you said, it was vacuous in some senses. He offers an apple which is hollow.
Yeah, absolutely. it's a hologram of an apple. But
even better, yes.
But there were plenty of things that we didn't touch on in the last version of the show, and plenty of things that should have been touched on but weren't because of time or the rocky development.
Yes.
It was very
bumpy. It's a bumpy road.
It was a bumpy road. It was just a roller coaster.
There's nothing worse than a roller coaster on a bumpy road.
Absolutely,
no.
Yeah,
Conversely,
quite.
however, let's not undersell this. The Edinburgh show was a great show, or I wouldn't be talking to you today.
Well, thank you. I was very happy with the Edinburgh show, but as I say, I came away from it, and Hannah and I had this. We thought about this carefully. We were like, do we want to just stop Quentin and develop something new? And we both felt no, there was more to do on Quentin, and we both felt that sort of the end was in sight, and neither of us wanted to walk away from the perfect Quentin show that we could sort of do, and we could both, after Edinburgh, we both learnt so much about different things. I learnt about how to write and what audiences like, and Hannah learnt so much about producing and all of her jazz. I think we both just came away from the festival with a really strong desire to see it through and just to put the full stop there. It's my belief that this is 100 times stronger than what we had before.
Which is reaching the potential again, isn't it? Which once again is a thematic piece from the original.
Absolutely.
Or not achieving it in the case of our sort of everyman couple, if you like.
That's right. Yes.
So you're clearly happy with this version of the show.
I'm very happy with this version. For the first time, really, I'm extremely proud of the Quentin Dentin show.
But that's the book. There's also getting into the mindset of the way you had written the music for the show, and by which I mean. I suppose I talk about integrated scores. I mean, I'll compare you, if you like, with Sandy Wilson, who wrote The Boyfriend. Now, people will know that Sandy Wilson wrote The Boyfriend as a fairly short show. It was then a huge success, so he expanded it into a 3-act comedy in the style of a 1920s comedy. And I think if you know that fact when you go in, you can probably work out the bits he's added later on. But he's been very clever. He takes some of the thematic tunes and themes and elements of sometimes just orchestration and puts them in. So the whole thing looks like it was written all in one go. You have to really search for it.
Yeah, I've done some of that, sort of sowing false seeds.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly the point. Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. So, but is that... Did you find yourself writing any new songs for this, when you thought, actually, no, this is a good song, but it isn't the right song for this? Or do songs change as you write them?
The fact is, I just didn't. I've been doing this for so long, this show, and writing, songs for Quentin and stuff. It's a really established sort of rhetorical standpoint in my head at this point. I can pretty much snap into that.
Well, that's interesting. So, really, because of... We've said it before. Because you have been Quentin, and you are both his father, and you have been Quentin. That's one up on Luke Skywalker, frankly. So it's in your blood in a way. So almost everything you do when you switch on the Quentin in your head is going to be Quentin-esque.
Yeah.
I find that quite interesting, because sometimes you can see. I mean, I'll compare you now to Stephen Sondheim. You might want to write some of these down. When Saturday Night, which was his unproduced show from the 50s, was finally produced, and I think in 2000, in London actually, it went to the one in Fleet Street, the Brideswell Theatre. Right. And since then it's been revived on and off as one of these sort of Sondheim curios. it actually had a very well-financed production in America, for which Sondheim wrote 2 new songs. Now, Sondheim in 1955-56 is very different from Stephen Sondheim in 2010.
That's 50 years, though.
50
I imagine that they
years.
stuck out a bit.
Well, that's the point. I had this
They
game.
didn't.
Well, I asked people, can you sell the new songs in Saturday night? And the interesting thing is, they can usually spot one, but they can't spot the other. And I don't know what one can draw from that. The one they can normally spot is because the lyrics are so very clever. They're almost too clever by half, if to use that awful phrase. But then again, 50 years is half a century. I mean, that is... You're nowhere near that yet.
This has been more like 1 year.
If I ask you that question again in 2050 or something like that, when I think it would be a legitimate comparison. But it's interesting that actually, you can continually add songs. Jerome Kern carried on writing extra songs for Showboat, which was written originally in 1926, and I think he died in 1945, for the rest of his life.
Really? Wow.
And somebody calculated that if you did the complete score of Showboat, it would take 24 hours.
Amazing.
Although one day you do hope that someone might actually do that.
God, yeah, that would be brilliant. It'd be like sort of, like the Veil of the Temple or something.
Yes.
But like the Veil of the Showboat.
Bring your own bed and some Red Bull, I suppose.
Exactly, yeah. I'd love that.
So we've spoken about the score,
Yeah.
and we've spoken about the book, but there is this difference, which is you are no longer playing Quentin. Now, you've said, very flatteringly, I think, to the person taking it over, who is a professional actor
Yes.
and will be great, I'm sure, that he therefore will bring something new to this Quentin. You mustn't undersell your own Quentin. Your Quentin owned the stage he was on. And that's a great deal to do with you and your
Thank you.
striking performance and your striking stage presence, but also, I think, you said it yourself, that ability to own a stage because of your rock skills in your other life, as it were. Is giving up the theatrical, the physical performance aspects of Quentin difficult for you, or a relief?
It was momentarily difficult for me because these are songs that I originally wrote for myself. It's hard to let go of certain things that you wrote for your own pleasure in saying. Yeah. But no, I think that another thing that I really realised in Edinburgh was just how bad of an idea it is generally. Certainly while a show is in development to act in it, because I had so little perspective. You find yourself maybe sort of reaching heights that you wouldn't otherwise reach because you know that you're capable of performing something. You also lock away things that you're not capable of performing. I would leave out things from Quentin that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing because I'd know that I had to do it.
That's really interesting, actually.
And now, as soon as I said, right, I'm not going to play Quentin anymore, I stepped away from that kind of box, and I immediately started thinking things about the character that I'd never thought before, like, okay, where does he come from? Who does he answer to?
Which is merely hinted at.
It's now much more, I wouldn't say, it's not, no questions are really answered, but it's hinted at more.
The enigma is ratcheted up.
The enigma is ratcheted up, yes. And that's one of my favourite elements of the show now, and that's something that I would never even have really considered if I hadn't stepped away, because you can't see a character when you're looking out from inside them. I just had no perspective on the character, and that's another thing. That's the reason that Hannah and I have decided that I'm not going to act in Summer Nights in Space as well, is because it's genuinely a handicap. I find personally as a writer to be acting in my shows. Well,
it's very interesting because you mentioned the costume is so much a part of Quentin. This idea that actually by putting on the golden suit, it's true, when you wear clothing you are trapped within them. They are an outer casing. I mean, this is all figurative, obviously, but I do see the point you're making, that it's difficult therefore to extrapolate beyond the limits you have yourself, particularly if the marriage is so close. So we're very early days in rehearsals yet, aren't we, for this London production. But have you had any inklings or hints as to what the new performer, Luke, is going to be bringing that surprise you? Because one of the joys, actually, I think, once you have given yourself the opportunity to let go of the part of own the production, is that other people bring things that you sometimes just don't
absolutely,
see.
Absolutely.
In a way that audiences sometimes can open your eyes as well.
Totally. Well, we've got such a wonderful cast on this show. We've got the friends, the two robot chicks, are new actresses. The wonderful Lydia Costello and Felix Dentin, aptly named.
And Felix is a woman, isn't she?
Felix is a woman, yes.
That is unusual. I noticed that on the website and I thought, hello, that's clever.
We've got returning cast members Jamie Tibker and Shauna Crook.
And they are our couples, aren't they? Yes,
they're playing Keith and Nat. And they bring so much to those roles that they're sort of ciphers as they go, Keith, in that, and it is kind of up to the actors to bring it out, and they do such a wonderful job.
It's hard almost, isn't it, to be affably... When I say bland, that's not because they are bland.
God,
it's
yeah.
because, but they are everyman people for whom exciting things are happening.
Yeah, no, they're intentionally nondescript, shabby people, and it's a difficult thing for an actor, particularly, because all actors want to be playing exciting pirates and things.
Yes, quite.
I think it's a challenge for actors to do that and to sort of bring it down and bring it in a bit, but they do such wonderful jobs. But I should say, Quentin's arc has been sort of minorly but significantly rewritten. Luke Lane, who is now playing Quentin Dentin, he's just going to be stunning. Like, number one, he's got magnificent presence. He's a real, West End musical performer. Shining white teeth, raven black hair.
In the right places, not swapped.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. And he's got a, magnificent charisma. He's also got a lot of intensity to him and a lot of kind of neuroticism to him. Mm-hmm. One thing that I really like about Quentin now, and this is partly in the script, but it's also largely in the way that Luke plays him, is that Quentin is also on a journey of chasing after self-improvement.
Right.
He is now anyway, and Luke brings a fantastic quality of Quentin is actually, this therapist is actually the most unhinged of the lot of them, and he's really spiraling. He really spirals out over the course of the play.
Well, you said something very interesting at the very beginning of this conversation. You said the new show is meaner and funnier, but you've put them in that order. I thought that's
it's very much meaner.
Yes, because it's all about. It's been speech marks comic torture if people understand the context of what we're speaking.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the sort of meanness of it, it's also less mean. It's got one moment of genuine redemption in it now, which it's zero before. But the Quentin show is a sort of it's a kind of musical rally for bad thinking. Like
that is a beautiful sentence.
It's all really bad advice, and it's really twisted advice, and the basic premise of the advice, in the show is that it's a sort of interrogation of the things that we see around us in magazines and in adverts and basically in our mass culture, and it's an interrogation of the kind of ideas of happiness that we're supposed to buy into, and it's thinking, what would it be like if someone laid all this stuff out, maybe sort of putting across the same ideas but in a slightly more blunt or kind of truthful way. That's what Quentin is.
It's that rework. Funny enough, it's the double meaning of "we can make you happy."
Make you here force you to be happy. Yeah, exactly.
It's not we have the ability. It is we are going to make you happy, whether you want it or not.
That's right. Making friends, making people like you.
Yes.
Making people like you.
People, yes.
The shows, but I mean, in terms of meanness, the things that really contributes to it being meaner now, I think the fact that Quentin has a much more developed character, and Quentin is also on his own kind of desperate journey, and he is not the big bad. Quentin is also on a doomed journey of self-improvement.
He's on someone else's chessboard.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, and then also the new ending, which I really don't want to spoil for you, but it's a very it's the meanest ending I could think of.
Oh, right. Because the meanness in the character of Quentin, last time we were talking about that supercilious doctor character, which appears so much in British culture from the last 50, 60 years. And actually, when you think about it, because even when you were talking about the meanness just now, I was thinking, as we have discussed, Graham Garden and Jonathan Miller, and that kind of sort of sneery, I'm cleverer than you, and so I know better than you kind of...
Totally,
it's not patrician, it's... I don't know what the word is. It's not totalitarian, I suppose. So. Right. In a nutshell, then, you've got me. I'm coming. I'm taking people. So don't worry about that. I think Quentin Dentin has a fantastic life ahead of him, and I want to see. As I said before, by the way, I thought Quentin's one of those characters you could put into other shows. So one day I'd like him to have his own channel.
That. I mean, yeah, like I would. Quentin could, have a chat show. That would be pretty amazing. No one would come on it.
Yeah, you'd have to bite your tongue, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But tell me, so why should people come and see the new Quentin Dentin?
Okay.
The all-new Quentin Dentin show, as they used to advertise the cartoon series.
People should come and see the Quentin Dentin show. That is a given. Okay, why should you come and see the Quentin Dentin show? Well, it's a new piece of writing. Not brand new, it's been tested and it's been polished to a fine sheen at this point. So this is the version of the Quentin Dentin show that you should come and see. This is the definitive version, and I think you'll come out of the Quentin Dentin show having had a brilliant time, having laughed a lot, having tapped your feet a lot, heard some amazing songs, amazing instrumentalists, seen some hilarious acting, but you'll also come out of it, hopefully, thinking about the things that you might take for granted and the things that you might believe are immutable laws about the way that we should live and the way that we should think. And my intention, at least, is that you should come out with a smile on your face and a song in your heart, but also a sleepless night in your future.
Yeah. Well, it does leave you with a question in your soul, and that's exactly what I thought when I left in Edinburgh. As I said, I really enjoyed it at the time. I enjoyed it at the time, but it absorbed me in the weeks and months afterwards as I was thinking about the message. I've got two final questions for you. The first is, does Quentin have a middle name? It's only a stupid question, but I've always assumed it was Edwin. Because first of all, Quentin Edwin Dentin is brilliant, but also it's QED.
That's very good. I think he does now, and it's Edwin. Yeah, that's really good, Thuz.
I just loved it because I like QED.
That's really good.
And the second question is, Henry, you're such a bubbling, creative person, but I do hope that you'll talk to me again as various shows point out.
It's such a pleasure to see you, and it's such a pleasure to be on this podcast.
Well, the pleasure is entirely
thank
mine.
you.
It's my pleasure to talk to creative people, and goodness me, you are charismatic and interesting, so thank you.
Bring in the brain machine! 1, 2, 3, 4! You should have watched more TV. This is overdue. You can't see the woods for one tree, and the tree is you. Did you think living here was free? There's things you have to do, things that you have to be, or you won't pull through. It isn't fascism, if it's good for you. Alright, let's go, turn it on! Thought crimes, you've committed them. Thought crimes, you're not a model citizen. Thought crimes, to be an urban denizen. Thought crimes, you gotta take your medicine. What are you looking at? I'm helping these people. I know the machine looks a bit scary, but all it's doing is extracting their souls. You see, they're so much better off without that stuff. I'm the good guy. Yes, well, obviously all of that stuff has to go too. I mean, these people have to function in society with you. It's done! I fixed them! Oh, it's a beautiful world. Take your medicine, no worries. Take your medicine, and I do what I'm told. Take your medicine, not sorry. Take your medicine, your problems are clear. Take your medicine, stop lying, stop crying, stop trying.
Musical talk. Well, Hannah, it's a great pleasure to talk to you on the record, although we met in Edinburgh last year on the Royal Mile, watching one of Henry's performances of some of the songs from the show on one of the stages there. You were wearing two hats, if I may say, not just because it was windy in Edinburgh, but because at that time you were the producer, as you still are, from the very beginning of this show, from its earliest incarnations to now. But you've also, in the past, in Edinburgh, for example, had the extra role of being director. So, first of all, let's talk about producer, because that's really the thing you are and what you're most delighted by. How does one become a producer?
Well, one becomes a producer simply by doing it.
You wake up one day and say, I shall.
Yes, you do. You kind of wake up and you're like, I want to do a show. And you realise no one else is going to make your show happen but you.
That's a very good show business start. I want to do a show.
So you go out there and you get the people and you get the writer and you get the money and you get the venue and you just make it all happen. And that's the joy of it, because something that didn't exist previously now exists.
It is a creative role, isn't it? People sometimes think being a producer is merely a logistical thing, that you're the person who books the rooms. Now, whilst that's true, that is not all it is.
It's very, very misunderstood. I feel a lot of people think producers are either like paper pushers or crazy old guys who smoke cigars and make big money decisions, but it's not. It's a very, very creative role, because by having control of the budget and by doing the fundraising and by having puppet master fingers in all of the different pies, as it were, that form a show, you are controlling what happens.
So you don't just oversee, you actively oversee. You have to have a finger, as you say, in each of the pies, in each of the, because a show isn't just performers on the stage, it's everything. And whilst there may be a choreographer, you've got to find the choreographer. There's going to be costume designer, you've got to find the costume designer. Sometimes those jobs will overlap, sometimes they won't, depending on the kind of show. But it is a big responsibility. And yet, here you are, still 2 years later into Quentin's development, and you're still loving it, I hope.
I love it, yeah.
So, and you're moving to the West End now. Let's talk, we'll talk in a minute about its Edinburgh version, when you had a sort of extra role because you were also director. But Quentin is coming to London again. It's coming to the Above the Arts, which is a good West End theatre. It's Leicester Square. So how did this come about?
I went to go and see a couple of shows at Above the Arts. I went to go see a double bill there of two things I had already seen. Love Song for the Electric Bear, which is the Hope Theatre's production, which was double billed with Vampire Hospital Waiting Room.
Which I went to see.
And I went to see
yes.
in Edinburgh as well.
Yeah, I saw it both Edinburgh and in London, yes.
And I was sitting there watching Love Song for the Electric Bear and Vampire Hospital Waiting Room and thinking, gosh, these two shows, like the visual style of Love Song and the kind of like zaniness and
heightened playing,
unashamedness of Vampire Hospital Waiting Room, I was sitting there thinking, gosh, these two put together kind of are really similar to Quentin Dentin.
Tonally, yes.
Tonally, yeah.
Yes, very much
they are. And also Vampire Hospital Waiting Room was a musical. Love Song for the Electric Bear had music as well. So I was like, you know what? I bet the producer at Above the Arts would be really into Quentin. So I went to the box office, got his card and just sent him the script and the songs, and he was like, yeah, sure.
This is the kind of thing we're looking for.
Yeah, he was like, this is the kind of thing we want in our late night slot. Something experimental that hasn't necessarily been a kind of big hit elsewhere before.
Cult is an odd word, isn't it? But it's a unique slice, I think. What I love about the Quentin Dentin show is the fact that it's hiding its subversion in plain sight. Because it's a very subversive show. It's very satirical. I think it opens, for the people who are receptive to it, it asks a lot of questions about the way we live today. That's a very dry way of saying that actually it's plugged right into the zeitgeist, and you can take as much or as little of that away with you. But it's fun, I think. It's subversive, fun, satirical. These are words I like. These are adjectives I like. We were talking about tone. Are those the words you'd use to describe it?
I think the show's very sadistic.
Sadistic.
And I love that. I love it. I think it's really awful, but really wonderful at the same time.
It's certainly wonderful. So explain that a little then, because is it because Quentin is a little bit of a sadistic character? He sort of tortures the everyman characters, doesn't he? A bit, but it's heightened sort of comedy torture, if that makes sense. It's not waterboarding.
Yeah, it's comedy torture. It's
poking at it until you get
but
a reaction.
It's the fact that the audience are eased into it, which I like about the show. It's not like some of this kind of, I'm going to say, theatre I don't like, where these are issues that are going to be discussed in this show, and it's very clear from the beginning when you buy a ticket that this is going to be like an issue show, and you have to sit through it thinking, right, okay, what do I think about like Brexit or whatever, Am
I allowed to have my own views,
exactly.
Or do I have to have the views of the stage given to me? Yes,
absolutely. But Quentin, what's so great about it, this is in the production and it's also in the writing as well. You can think of it on that level, but also if you don't want to, you don't have to.
You can just take it as a slice of fun.
You can just take it as a slice of fun. Hopefully we'll get people who aren't going into it expecting to think, we'll get them to think.
Yes. Sort of think sideways almost.
Yeah, diagonally.
So what have been the challenges for you as a producer then with moving to London for this show? By which I mean taking Quentin into the art.
Okay, so bringing the show to London has been a hell of a lot easier than taking the show to Edinburgh.
Oh, really? Now that's very interesting. Why is that?
Really?
Because in a way you'd have thought, forgive me, it's a fringe show is how it feels. And you'd think a fringe show to Edinburgh would be like a horse to water, but it's more a horse to slaughter.
Edinburgh's a horse to slaughter. Yeah, it's the thing is, there's less competition in London than at Edinburgh in the festival.
Well, yes, there are thousands and thousands of shows, and people screaming in the street, come and see our show, I suppose, yes.
And, we were all living in a flat together in Edinburgh, a flat for 6, and there was like 13 of us in the flat.
Yes.
Yeah. We're all kind of not living together now, which makes, that makes things a lot easier because everyone's got their space and can work in their own way.
It makes everything more professional.
It's been easier to fundraise for London, actually, than Edinburgh, because we had a track record of doing something decent in Edinburgh. So people were attracted to the show, whereas in Edinburgh, what we'd previously done, we'd done a residency at Rich Mix here in East London for 2 weeks, and then we'd done like 1 or 2 shows, which wasn't much of a track record.
The very fact that as a producer you managed to get the show to Edinburgh, run for 3 weeks, which is the full whack, and then bring it back again with no one dead, I think is a real testament. But I can see that actually, yes, that's a really good way of saying, look, we are a professional unit, this is a good show, we can deliver. And look, it's got a track record. So I see the point you make. Just having been through the fire of Edinburgh, as it were, gives you a slightly easier ride of...
Going through the fire of Edinburgh, and if you come out still alive and the show is still good, then you've got a good show.
Yes.
That's why I booked the space for the whole 3 weeks. Didn't go up just for a week, because I thought, if this is any good, we can do it for 3 weeks. And it was.
It is. I love the show up in Edinburgh, and I'm very glad I saw it. I'm very glad it's come to London, I must say. I know it's changed slightly. Has that presented you with any particular difficulties? I appreciate that without giving any of the new plot away, but there will be new props and things like that, and slightly different costumes, and just the fact you've got a different cast. Unless they share exactly the same physical characteristics of the previous ones, they will need different clothing.
Unfortunately, they don't. Yes. And unfortunately, we're having to buy...
new golden boots.
No, we're not having to buy new golden boots, actually. We're going to use an insole. It's going to be fine.
You've cast on foot size. I like that.
Yeah, it's all right. No, we're going to have to get a new suit, and we're going to need to get new boiler suits for the friends. Yeah. I mean, it is only 3 of the cast that have changed. So, to be honest, the main expense is the new costume for the new Quentin. But it'll be fine.
And what's the dynamic like, therefore, as a result, where you've got half a returning cast and a half a new cast? Does that help forge a brand new show, or does it, in some way, sort of bring the ghost of the old show with it? I mean, is it a good thing, a bad thing, or is it not actually a problem one way or the other?
I think it's a good thing, because, I don't know, it's kind of the friendly ghost of the old show.
Casper.
Yeah, Casper, because the old show was quite good. And I think Jamie and Shauna, who play Keith and Nat, are bringing with them the energy of the old show. And they also know all of the blocking, which most of it is similar blocking is in place. It's not changing physically radically as a show. I mean, I know everything. Caldi's doing amazing work with, putting in new choreography, and all the new writing obviously needs to be blocked. But it's not a completely different show for London. So Jamie and Shauna already know all the blocking. And
they know their characters.
And they know their characters. Yeah. So it makes the job for Caldi, the director, easier, because she mainly has to work with Lydia and Felix, who are playing the friends, and Luke, who is playing Quentin, to bring in their interpretations of the characters into the mix. And it also makes it easier for me, because it means that I have to book less rehearsal space.
Can you say how it feels different? I use the word feel advisedly, because Henry has already explained that he's developed some of the characters. He described it interestingly as Quentin as being both meaner and funnier. So he sort of enhanced some of the extremes that were already there. But you're also a fellow traveller with Henry. You were there at the beginning, you were there in Edinburgh, and now here you are in the build-up to London. How does it feel? Does it feel vastly different, or does it... your impressions of it?
It does feel meaner. I think that's a good phrase. It feels meaner, it feels funnier, the energy feels more hyperactive.
It was pretty on in Edinburgh.
It's going to be more. I think there's going to be more dancing. It's actually got shorter by a couple of minutes.
Because of the dynamism of the performance?
No, just because of script cuts.
Oh, really? Oh, right.
Even though several new songs have been added, script's been cut, it's like really, really condensed marzipan.
Yeah. As it happens, I adore marzipan, so that's very good. So, yeah, so it's had a little bit, not that there was much fat, but it's just had a little bit of trimming done.
It's been on a diet, yeah.
Yes. So it's leaner and meaner, in fact, as takes us back to where we started. It does sound very physical as a show.
It is. I didn't expect it to be this physical. When I first started working on the show back in 2014, and then when Henry came on board and it was, right, this is going to be a musical, I didn't expect it to end up being almost a dance piece. Because, I don't dance. Henry doesn't have a dance background. We just didn't think about that.
Well, the Friends almost do a lot of the dance on behalf of the rest of the cast in a strange way, don't they?
They do, but I think what's happening for London, everyone's in the big musical numbers, there's going to be more proper musical theatre, kick lines, jazz hands, all that.
Good Lord.
But the show kind of evolved to become really, really physical, which is great because Ella Donaldson, who was in the show in Edinburgh, who's now no longer in the show, she started to come in with a dance background, and then Caldy, who's now directing it and choreographing it, came in, and suddenly we realised we had this kind of vehicle which could just be like incredibly insane in incredible choreography, and it's wonderful. I don't understand what's going on at all. They just kind of move around and it looks fabulous.
I tell you what, it was very organic dance-wise, actually, I thought last time when I saw it in Edinburgh. And I'm slightly informed by having seen it on the stage when we met. Because what I really loved was that the two friends would jump off the stage, sort of cavort a little bit with the audience who were watching and the crowd, but then jump back on again, and one would find a sort of a way of dancing to that particular point of music where they were back at, and the other one would just sort of take one look and immediately find synchronicity with them. So there was a good sort of, they were sort of simpatico almost. It's interesting to me that one of those people,
Caldy,
thank you, is now the director as well as the choreographer, because it seemed to me that she had a sort of almost, how should I put this, she was innately involved and connected with the score of it, which sort of underlays the Quentin elements. Because as Henry and I were talking, we were saying that the original show was almost like a semi-serious play which gets hijacked by a musical.
Yeah, and that was it's no longer like that at all, because now it's a very obvious musical theatre structure from the very beginning.
And it's got a song at the beginning, yes.
It does. Have you heard it?
No, not yet,
Quentin has a big vocal solo at the beginning explaining who he is. But I quite liked it when it was this kind of very, very serious 20-something drama, and then Quentin just kind of
enough of you.
He just fell into the flat and was like, hey guys, I'm here.
Yes.
I'm going to have some fun now.
Even if you don't.
even if you don't. Even if this wasn't the play you thought you were going to come see, I'm here. I would like elements of that to be retained in this production, because I think that's really interesting and something you don't see much of. You don't get your expectations of genre confounded very often nowadays.
Things don't turn on the sixpence halfway through.
I go and see stuff and it's exactly what I thought it would be when I saw the flyer.
Yeah, which is fine to a degree, but sometimes you want to be have the rug pulled out from under you.
Well, I know what I'm spending my money on, but I don't go home enlightened.
And that's a very interesting observation. Henry was also talking about the audience being a very important part of the show, and he says that's much more enhanced now. That in Edinburgh, although it was always a part of the show, it wasn't quite as overt, and now he says the audience is actually a diegetic part of the show.
Yes.
How does that affect, well, you as producer, but also in your view of having watched the show develop, is getting an audience involved can be risky, can't it? Because the audience doesn't always want to do what it's being led to do.
It can be, but then again, in Edinburgh we were on at 10 o'clock at night. In London, we're on at 10 o'clock at night.
Yes.
There's a bar downstairs in London. There was a bar outside the theatre in Edinburgh. I don't think we are going to have much of a problem getting the audience involved.
You'll have a particular clientele, I suspect.
I think it's going to be fine getting them involved, because they'll be instructed from the outset that they are going to be required to get involved. One of the problems with the show in Edinburgh, I think, was the audience were not instructed from the very beginning that this was going to be a show which they'd have to participate in.
People need licence to be able to respond, particularly in Britain, I think.
Oh, yeah.
They need to be told they can.
We're very, very conservative here. How loud can I clap is it's a big issue.
Which is why in pantomime, which of course is the great fourth wall breaker in British theatrical culture, the dame is the first character who comes on fairly soon, as indeed will the hero or heroine come on and say, my name's Jack, what's yours? Or when I come on, why don't you shout, hiya Jack? They are actually overtly telling the audience that they can get involved, and you have to find a clever way of doing that in a non-pantomime environment, don't you?
You do, but pantomime is wonderful.
You don't have to tell me.
as is kids' theatre, because it gives people permission to shout back, and that is something which we are going to include more of in this version of the show, so the audience don't feel like they're watching a musical where they just applaud when the musical numbers finish.
You want to reconnect the disconnect.
Absolutely.
That can sometimes happen. So we're not talking Brecht here, are we?
No.
Although it is quite Brechtian, I must say. But you want the audience in on it. So. But it's interesting what you were saying, that in Edinburgh that you didn't feel that had been quite developed because the audience didn't really know they had that licence. So what other things have you seen? What things happened in Edinburgh which have informed this version here in London? What lessons have been learned?
We learnt that Quentin needs to come in earlier.
Oh, really? So hence this new iteration where he's right at the beginning rather than this hijack, which, as you say, is a lovely conceit. But I can see that he's such a strange character that perhaps he can be alienated.
The hijack is wonderful, but then we create this problem where the audience were not expecting this guy to come in and flirt with them. And they're kind of really disarmed and don't know how to deal with it or how to react. So he needs to come in earlier. That needs to be sorted out earlier. I think the show's now more mainstream.
Is it?
Than it was in Edinburgh, I think. Henry might disagree with me.
By mainstream, do you perhaps mean more accessible rather than mainstream?
I mean accessible and mainstream.
Oh, right, okay, fine.
Mainstream in the sense that the Rocky Horror Picture Show is actually quite mainstream.
It is now?
Yeah.
Yes, all right. I see, right. It's riding on the
Or Little Shop of Horrors is quite mainstream.
Yeah.
Because everybody likes it, and the plot is really simple. The plot for both of them is really simple, actually. And it's not like Shock Treatment where you're like, what is going on here?
However, they're all populated with grotesques. And grotesques take you out of the mainstream, or rather they are an acceptable form of fringe on the mainstream, aren't they? Here are weird and possibly dangerous people, slightly edgy people who are sort of bigger than life and actually sort of almost unbelievable. But when you put them in the context of those shows, you can root for them if that's the character. They're playing the protagonist rather than the antagonist. But it's interesting to me that in this context, because I haven't seen the London version yet as we speak, I'd be very interested to know how Quentin comes across, because Quentin's supposed to be enigmatic and you're supposed to be drawn to him and yet at the same time repelled by him, aren't you? Is that the grotesque he's offering us still, or would you say that? Because Henry did say that he's a little bit more neurotic now than perhaps he was. He's got something to worry about himself.
He does. You'll have to ask Luke about this, to be honest. He knows more about the character than I do.
He's currently wearing the shoes, isn't he?
He is wearing the shoes. Yeah, I hope that he's going to be more attractive and more repellent at the same time, because that
is the dichotomy of Quentin.
That's what we want. We want the audience. He always reminds me of Iago in Othello.
Oh, really? Now that's interesting.
Because
go on.
Iago's like a really sexy character, but he does some really awful things. And he chats to the audience and you're kind of on his side, but then you watch him like bully this poor guy into submission. And then he turns to the audience and he's like, yeah, aren't I great? And you're kind of with him.
So this is Richard III as well, isn't it? Which
yeah,
is, yes.
Yeah.
Which breaking the fourth wall in certain versions.
This is why I say I think the show is sadistic, because you're on the torturer's side by the nature of the fact that he is nice to you, and that's kind of sick. But that's what I like about how it affects the audience, because it makes them kind of question, hopefully will make them question their judgment of character and their thoughts on what is acceptable.
This is Stockholm Syndrome, the musical, then.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Anything else you've picked up from Edinburgh, even just simple things, on the production side? Should props always be light? Because one of the things I loved in Edinburgh was actually the slightly tongue-in-cheek nature of some of the equipment. There was a kind of sort of mind probe, which was a colander.
Oh no, the colanders are still in the show.
But I thought that was perfect when that was rolled on a rack, for brains to be inserted into. It looked exactly right. And
it's the brain machine.
Yes, well, it is exactly what it is then, isn't it? Yes. I thought that looked beautiful as well. So that tonal point is still there.
That's still there. I love the DIY feel of the show. The fact that the brain machine is colanders and a clothes rail and some fairy lights. I mean, it looks kind of steampunk, and the fact that we have just put cardboard boxes on the stage and have gone, this is a flat, guys. Okay, one thing we can't afford a proper, so it's
you make a virtue of your necessity.
It's what we have to work with. Yeah.
One of the things I liked about the Edinburgh show, though, was its soundscape. It had very full sound, not just from the orchestra, the band, which did all the backing, but also some of the sound effects helped sort of develop the sci-fi aspect of it. To this day, I can very clearly remember Henry as Quentin sort of describing an arc, by which I mean actually, tracing it out with his hands, and there were sound effects that sort of went with it to suggest there was some kind of sort of virtual reality interface going on, which we couldn't see, but we could clearly imagine that he could see. Good sci-fi concepts, all done really with committed acting and some really good sound. Do you recognise the concept of the soundscape within Quentin Dentin? Is that something that you were helping to develop?
Oh, the soundscape is really, really important because it makes the audience believe that Quentin is magic. And the fact that he can just point his finger and there's a sound effect, even though you don't see what's going on and everyone looks in the direction of where this thing is, it makes him... The fact that he controls the music makes him the most powerful character on the stage and is one of the most important parts of the show, and him as the central character in the show.
But we should talk briefly about the fact that when you were in Edinburgh, you weren't just producer, which is a big ask, but you were also director as well. That seems to me an enormous headache.
It was an enormous headache. It's a lot of work to produce and direct a show, and I wouldn't recommend it because it means that you're doing both the jobs at like 75% capacity when you could be doing one of them at 100% capacity.
Well, that's a good
and that
yes.
affects both the production side of things and it affects the quality of direction in the show. For this show, which is actually for a fringe show, I think it's quite large scale because there's dancing, there's music, there's this, that, costumes, makeup, there's everything in the show. It becomes impossible to do everything. So that is why I'm now producing the show, and Caldi, who was one of the friends in Edinburgh, is now directing and choreographing the show.
But direction and choreography in a show like this are sort of very married together anyway, aren't they? So that actually makes a very great deal of sense, actually, to have someone who could just sort of slip from one to the other.
Yeah, I mean, she did a lot of choreography for the show in Edinburgh, and she basically ended up directing all of the dance sequences through her choreography. So it was a very easy step to make for her to become the director.
Did you enjoy directing it in Edinburgh?
Not in Edinburgh.
You did in previous
I did before Edinburgh. I enjoyed creating it, I'm going to say, rather than directing it.
Was it because of the pressures on you as an individual, as producer and director in Edinburgh, that stopped that really being enjoyable for you? Or is it just that Edinburgh brings its own problems anyway, which no one ever sees in advance? Because it does. It's a tall order taking a show to Edinburgh. And whilst it's an environment that welcomes a show, obviously, because the festival is there for shows, you are one of millions.
Edinburgh's a money pit.
It is that. Yeah.
It's designed cleverly to take all of your money at every possible turn. The taxi drivers charge more.
Oh, yes.
Even to buy a stapler, it costs more money. To photocopy, it costs more money. This is just me complaining now.
No, but I go up as a punter, obviously. But yes, I know that chocolate bars are twice the price.
It's very clever. The landlords know what they're doing, and people like us will pay because we don't have any other option. But I enjoyed creating the show before Edinburgh. It was the fundamental building blocks of making something that didn't previously exist. When we hit Edinburgh, and from Edinburgh to now, although the show has been added to and developed and rewritten, the thing exists. Prior to Edinburgh, not a complete thing existed. And I really, really enjoyed... I love it.
It's the creativity is the act that you find the most exciting. Where the rest is, if you like, navigation in a way almost. Would that be fair, would you say?
For directing or producing?
Well, possibly both, you tell me. I'm just thinking, but if you're involved in the creation as you were, and then once you've been through the directorial stage but you've got the slog of actually getting the show produced, it seems that whilst there is creativity, of course there's creativity in all aspects of theatre. I mean, it's part of the deal, I think. I can see that the curve of creativity possibly drops off a little bit. Is that fair, or am I just talking nonsense?
No.
It has been known.
I don't think it does.
Oh, right, it doesn't.
Because I wouldn't say putting the show on and producing it is a slog at all. It's wonderful. And
you really do like being a producer.
I love it.
See that.
Yeah, because even if a thing already exists, if the script's just sitting in the drawer, it's not doing anything.
No. I suppose it does need the performance to live, doesn't it?
Of course it does,
Of course,
yeah. So producing a show's not it's not a slog. Sure, there are emails and budgets and that kind of thing, but that's not hard if what the budget is for something wonderful.
So what is it that you found less appealing once you got to Edinburgh? Because you were saying the creative build-up to that was the part you liked the most. Mm-hmm. So what took it off the hot flames slightly for you then, getting to Edinburgh? Was it just the...
But the creative building blocks of the show prior to Edinburgh wasn't me as director. Sure, there was directing involved in it, but it was more a production role because...
Which is your true love, isn't
because the fact that the show developed through iterations of performances rather than drafts of a script sent to a director or a dramaturg sent back to the writer meant that at every iteration I was there thinking with my production hat on, is this worthwhile to take forward? What for the audience is going to be worthwhile to take forward again and again, and booking or finding or getting the space at appropriate intervals in the creative development of this thing. That's not a director. A director makes the show good, but the producer makes the show happen and makes it good.
Can I ask them, forgive me, and this is something I've heard writers say, and I've heard some directors say, but I'd value your view on this. Some writers say that they just write what they want to write, and then it is for the producer and the director to find a way of doing it. And I've heard some writers say, I get an instruction from my producer that what they want can't be done, so they have to go off and rewrite it and come up with something else. Is there a time when being a producer, in your experience, because every producer must do it differently to every other producer, but it's actually sometimes the necessity of saying no? Or is it always a positive accommodation rather than a negative one?
No.
Do you see what I'm saying?
There are no's.
There are no's.
There have to be points where there are no's. If something's a bad idea, or someone in the team, or some aspect of the production is not working, you have to say no. So
producers also have a dramaturg role then, in its widest sense?
They can.
Yes.
Not all producers would choose to. I think it's a really, really good idea, because ultimately theatre is for an audience, and if you can have someone who is constantly thinking about ticket sales, who is also dramaturging the show, you can hopefully create something which the audience will like.
Yes, tailored.
Yes, definitely. There's I think more producers should dramaturg. I don't think enough of them do.
Well, is it silo thinking sometimes? Because it's easy to say, I'm a producer and therefore I do what producers do, but I don't therefore necessarily tread on what the writer does or what the director does, when in fact actually because of the collaborative nature of theatre. But actually everyone has to have a little bit of a finger in every other pie, and that includes the writer and the director and choreographer. You know, they feed into each other, don't they? The writer's view is not the last view that the audience should see, it's the view that gets you to the stage, and when everyone else overlaps their extra bits on top of it to make it a better pie. He said, mixing all his metaphors. So far we have a theatre with a pie in it, but you get the idea.
Yeah. I think the most important thing is the audience. A lot of people would disagree with me.
But they're not here, so just tell me.
Yeah. The most important thing is the audience, and the audience enjoying the show.
Yeah. Who would disagree with you?
Many people. Theatre is for education, theatre is for instruction, theatre is for community good, this, that and the other.
Well, it can be for all of those things.
Of course it can, but if it's purely for those things without it also being entertaining, it's not my kind of cup of tea.
So I think we're talking about the people who come along with a big bucket of po-facedness.
We're talking about po-faced people here.
I think we know about po-faced people. I don't think they'll be coming to this show anyway, although they jolly well ought, because it might teach them a lesson.
They could, and they could learn.
Oh, that's very interesting, though, because I'm fascinated by, because we all roll out this phraseology about theatre being collaborative, and of course so it is. But actually how people collaborate is as much down to the individual roles and what they're prepared to collaborate upon, and sometimes people aren't prepared to collaborate. I can't give names, but I was talking to a musical director and a lyricist about a show that's on national tour, or has been in the last few years, and it's very much, speech marks, the baby of the person who came up with it, and that person absolutely hates any change being made, but unfortunately that person isn't up to the writing. And so there have been subversive attempts by cast, crew, directors, musical people to sort of slightly improve it on the road. And then every now and then the writer catches up with it and strips it all out again. So all the improvements are constantly being removed, which is why, presumably, it's not made its way back to the West End. It was never in the West End, I should say, if people are trying to work out what this show is. But, if people listen to each other better. I suppose you also do need the barriers, though, don't you? I mean, are there things that a producer that you feel that you shouldn't do?
I shouldn't write the show. Shouldn't put pen. Should never put me in front of a keyboard and ask me to compose anything. It would go horribly wrong. The producer can advise on creative matters.
Oh, advise is a good word, I think. Yes, it's
and they can
word.
Step in and say no, but I would say don't say no unless you really, really mean it. And hopefully people will trust you enough that they will take your advice.
Yes, so it's a no of last resort rather than a regular card to be played, as it were.
Yeah, a no would be a last resort, but that's fine,
So, Quentin Dentin in London.
Yeah.
Tell us when and where, and then tell us why we should go and see it.
So, the Quentin Dentin show is on at Above the Arts, which is the Arts Theatre.
It's a stone's throw from Leicester Square Tube Station.
Absolutely. From the 16th to the 28th of May, 2016. It's on at 10 o'clock at night till 10 past 11, so just enough time to get the last tube home.
And I've done it myself for other shows, so I know it can be done. It's actually a great way of finishing an evening.
And you should come and see the show because it's going to be a really enjoyable production.
It's a hoot, isn't it?
It is.
Well, thank you, Hannah. However, just briefly, I should say that you were responsible for the very splendid event at the beginning of the year, which was a kind of a showcase of shows that were being written here at Rich Mix in East London. Any more of that kind of thing coming up?
Yes, so in July we have a second date for another Scratch Night.
Very good.
It's going to be pretty similar to the first one, really. We're going to choose 6 new shows, and then I'm going to pair those shows with directors and performers, give each show a day of rehearsal, and wham bam, thank you ma'am, they all perform on stage.
It was a beautiful evening last time and sold out rather marvellously.
It sold really well.
Yes, it did, and I was very pleased to be there. And each of the shows were different, so if you didn't like one, there was another one along almost immediately afterwards, so there was something for everybody. It was a good evening.
I think we're going to keep the length similar, which was like 10 to 15 minutes for each.
That's right.
I went to a Scratch Night recently where it was like 20 to 25 minutes, and that if I didn't like something, that was a bit tough.
Yeah, I think 15's about right, actually. Yes, no, I agree with you, because it didn't outstay its welcome. Nothing did, so... Oh, well, I'm really pleased to hear that other sort of string to your bow is carrying on apace.
Well, it helps because I get to watch people that I know work, and I get to see if I like what they're doing. I get to work with other writers, other directors, and it's just... I think it's healthy to keep your tentacles out.
This is back to the idea, isn't it, of being a marionette master.
Yes.
Yes, as a producer, you have to have lots of strings, all attached to different people, so you might as well see the people in action.
Absolutely.
Hannah, thank you very much for talking.
Thank you, Thos.
And I look forward to seeing the show very much.
Thank you. I look forward to you coming to see it.
Musical talk. Well, there we are. That was Hannah Elsey, and before that you heard the peerless Henry Carpenter. I hope that's whetted your appetite to go and see the Quentin Dentin show in its new London incarnation. And here's how you can do it. It's on between the 16th and the 28th of May 2016. That's every day of the week, including Monday, excepting the 2 Sundays in that fortnight. It's on at 10 o'clock in the evening with an expected finishing time of 10 past 11, so still plenty of time to get home on London Underground. And you can see it at the studio space of the Arts Theatre, which is called Above the Arts. And the way to get to the website is artstheatrewestend.co.uk. The box office for the theatre is 020 7836 8463. And the theatre itself is in Great Newport Street, postcode WC2H7JB, but it is literally 1 minute away from Leicester Square Tube Station. Now, I've been around the block a bit when it comes to musical theatre, but I'm genuinely excited at the prospect of seeing the Quentin Dentin show in London in its new version. And I do hope that you'll think about coming along as well. If you're looking for something a little bit unusual, just a little bit skewed, but very dark and very funny, then the Quentin Dentin show is for you. It certainly is for me. And remember, you can hear more about it in another episode of Musical Talk in a few weeks' time, closer to the opening of the show, when we'll be talking to some of the cast and the director of that new show in London. That's something to look forward to. But for now, this episode of Musical Talk is staggering to its final flop in an armchair and its ending for today. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see out today's episode, or possibly hear out today's episode, with one more song from Henry Carpenter from the new version of The Quentin Dentin Show. Goodbye.
Everything's better in space. Water is wetter in space. Live out your dreams where nobody screams. There's literally no pressure in space.
To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com. Or subscribe to us on iTunes. And follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at MusicalTalkThos. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2016, except for the songs where the copyright remains with Henry Carpenter. And my thanks go to Henry for allowing us to play those songs and those extracts of songs in today's programme.
Bring in the brain machine!
I have a book.
What are you reading?
Believe it or not, I'm reading a book about the author of Florodora, the 1899 hit. So,
Wow, my bohemian life.
Well, yeah, it was written for a newspaper in the 20s.
Amazing.
His timing was perfection because he wrote his memoirs and then carked it. So. Perfection. See?
Brilliant.
Thank you, Leslie Stewart.
It's going to be sexy, subversive, and musical.
yeah.
Is that all right?
That's fine, yeah, if
Yeah.
you want to give me that.
Subversive, sexy. I won't put sexy first. Subversive, sexy, and musical. Yeah, that's all right.
Songfield.
What?
Subversive, sexy and Songfield, because it's a musical.
What's Songfield?
Songfield. No,
Oh,
it's just
song.
three S's with S's.
Yeah, subversive, sexy, and Songfield.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Now you sound like one of those late night telephone lines.
No.
Sorry.
You're just making me giggle now.